On a cold November night in 1775, a high-ranking British official walked into a dimly lit office inside Whitehall, London. Resting on his wooden desk was an intercepted letter, freshly opened by Crown codebreakers. As he read the words, his face turned pale. Across the Atlantic Ocean, King George III was preparing thousands of elite redcoats to crush the American rebellion. On paper, it looked like an easy victory. Britain possessed the largest navy on earth, endless gold, and a professional army that had never been beaten. But this secret letter revealed a terrifying truth. The British Empire was not just fighting farmers in Boston. They were being targeted from the inside, right here in the heart of London. A secret society of politicians, wealthy merchants, and intelligence operatives had formed inside British high society. While British generals planned their attacks in public, this hidden network was reading their orders before the ships even left the dock. They were leaking troop movements, sabotaging supply lines, and sending secret funding directly to George Washington. The British military thought they were dealing with a simple rebellion across the sea. In reality, they were bleeding from an invisible wound inside their own government. So, who were these secret operatives sitting in the shadow of the king? How did a hidden ring of insiders cripple the most powerful empire on earth from the inside out? To understand how dangerous this secret society was, you have to look at the British Empire in 1775. Britain had just won the 7 Years' War. They controlled vast lands in India, rich islands in the Caribbean, and 13 booming colonies in North America. Inside Parliament, politicians laughed at the idea of an American rebellion. King George III believed the colonists were ungrateful children who needed a quick lesson in discipline. The British war machine was unmatched. Royal Navy warships dominated every ocean, and redcoat regiments were trained to march straight into enemy fire without flinching. The plan in London was simple. Send a massive fleet across the Atlantic, capture major American ports, and starve the rebellion into submission within a few months. British leaders were so confident that officers were booking dinner parties in New York and Boston before their ships even left port. They assumed the war would be fought entirely on open battlefields thousands of miles away. But that hubris was their biggest blind spot. While British leaders celebrated their power in London taverns, they failed to notice what was happening right under their noses. Key men inside their own political system were quietly turning against the crown. These were not backcountry militia men with pitchforks. They were lords, shipping magnates, and government clerks. And they were about to build a silent trap that Parliament would never see coming. It started in the smoky back rooms of London's coffee houses and taverns. Groups like the Constitutional Society began meeting under the cover of night. On the surface, these men appeared to be ordinary British citizens, wealthy merchants, and reform-minded politicians discussing policy. But behind closed doors, they were organizing something far more dangerous. They shared a radical belief. They believed King George III was acting like a tyrant, violating British liberty, and pushing the colonies into a senseless war. To them, supporting the American cause was not treason. It was a fight to save freedom itself. This was not a loose group of loud protesters. It quickly evolved into a disciplined, secret network. Members used code names, secret handshakes, and hidden meeting spots across London. They placed trusted sympathizers inside key locations, including printing shops, shipping ports, and even government offices inside Whitehall. Their objective was clear and lethal: systematically slow down, confuse, and cripple the British war machine before it could crush the American colonies. If a troop ship needed to sail, they ensured its supplies were delayed. If a secret military memo was written, a copy was made before the ink even dried. The British military thought they were preparing for a war across the ocean. They had no idea that a hidden engine of sabotage had already been turned on right inside their own capital city. Every secret ring needs a brain, and in London, that brain belonged to a man named Arthur Lee. Lee was a brilliant lawyer from Virginia who was living in the heart of the British capital. On the surface, he was a respected gentleman moving smoothly through London's upper class. In reality, he was operating as a top spy master for the American colonies. Working closely with Benjamin Franklin's established contacts, Lee built an invisible web of informants that reached deep into the British establishment. He recruited disgruntled clerks, radical journalists, and sympathetic merchants. Picture how dangerous his daily life was. Crown spies and postal inspectors were constantly monitoring known colonial sympathizers. One wrong move meant a dark cell in the Tower of London and an executioner's noose for treason. To survive, Lee and his ring used advanced spy tradecraft. They wrote messages in invisible ink that only appeared when held over heat or treated with special chemicals. They used complex cipher systems, substituting numbers for names and locations. Letters were slipped inside the false bottoms of trunks or handed directly to trusted merchant captains sailing for neutral ports in Europe. While King George III sat in his palace, Arthur Lee was sitting in nearby taverns, reading confidential reports about British Army strength, gunpowder shortages, and naval movements. Before British generals in America even received their orders, Washington's agents in London had already read them, coded them, and sent them across the sea. The most shocking part of this shadow war was how high the infiltration went. This secret society was not just listening to rumors on the street. They had eyes inside Parliament and ears right outside the King's private cabinet meetings. Low-paid clerks working in British government offices were quietly bribed or convinced to help the American cause. Late at night, while London slept, these clerks unlocked heavy wooden cabinets and copied top-secret military dispatches. They copied troop counts, fleet schedules, and official routes planned for British supply ships. Members of Parliament who opposed the war also played a double game. During public debates, they used speech rights to stall military funding bills, causing long administrative delays. Behind closed doors, they slipped confidential strategic plans directly to Arthur Lee's couriers. Imagine the advantage this gave George Washington in 1775. The Continental Army was starving, short on gunpowder, and untrained. In a fair, open fight, the British regulars would have wiped them out in weeks. But Washington was never fighting blind. He knew when British supply ships were leaving port, what cargo they carried, and which routes they were taking. American privateers were tipped off in advance, allowing small colonial boats to ambush heavy British supply ships in the Atlantic, like clockwork. The British Admiralty kept losing ships carrying vital food, shoes, and gunpowder. They blamed bad weather and ocean storms. They had no idea their exact sailing dates were being leaked from desks right inside London. Stealing paper secrets was only the first phase. To truly cripple the British war machine in 1775, the Shadow Network targeted the beating heart of the empire, its supply chain. An army fighting 3,000 miles across an ocean runs on logistics. Every redcoat soldier in Boston required food, boots, musket balls, and barrels of black powder shipped directly from British docks. The secret society understood that if you stop the supplies in England, the soldiers in America become useless. Sympathetic merchants inside London's shipping industry began quietly throwing sand into the gears. Shipments of military boots were mysteriously misplaced in warehouses, sitting for weeks while redcoats marched through American mud with bare feet. Meat barrels meant for British troops were left improperly sealed on London docks, causing tons of rations to rot before ships even left harbour. Then came the mysterious fires. In late 1775, sudden, unexplained blazes broke out near key British naval yards and rope factories. Shipyards in places like Portsmouth and Bristol suffered sudden equipment failures and inventory losses. While official reports blamed careless workers, Crown investigators noticed a pattern. The destroyed inventory always happened to be critical naval stores, like canvas sails and specialized timber needed to repair British warships. These subtle, coordinated delays crippled British momentum during the most critical year of the war. British generals in Boston were left stranded, waiting month after month for supply fleets that were stuck, damaged, or delayed thousands of miles away in England. Fighting a global war requires massive amounts of cold, hard cash, and the secret society knew exactly how to hit Britain's financial spine. Wealthy British sympathizers and pro-American merchants began quietly moving funds through underground banking channels across Europe. Instead of sending money directly from London to America, which would mean immediate arrest for treason, the shadow network built a financial washing machine. Funds raised by radical groups in England were transferred covertly through merchant houses in Amsterdam and neutral ports in France. From there, the money was converted into gold, weapons, and Dutch gunpowder. European traders, tipped off by London's secret society, smuggled these war materials directly onto fast-moving ships headed for the Caribbean. American privateers met these ships at isolated islands, transferring tons of military supplies back to Washington's starving army. At the same time, members of the network inside London's financial district began spreading rumors about the astronomical costs of the American war. They manipulated trade reports and raised concerns among British investors. Stock prices for British trading companies fluctuated wildly, making it increasingly expensive for Parliament to secure loans for the war effort. By 1775, British taxpayers were funding a war that was growing costlier by the day, while a hidden pipe of British gold was quietly keeping the American Revolution alive from behind enemy lines. Parliament was pouring millions into a war effort that was constantly being drained from within. Wars are not fought only with muskets and gunpowder. They are fought in the minds of the people, and the secret society understood that public opinion in London was a battleground they had to win. In 1775, the Shadow Network launched a massive, coordinated propaganda campaign right under the King's nose. Radical printers and sympathetic publishers turned London's printing presses into weapons. Anonymous pamphlets, anti-war newspapers, and stinging political cartoons began flooding the streets of the capital every single morning. These publications highlighted the brutal realities of the war. They printed graphic stories of British casualties in America, exposed corrupt government war contracts, and argued that King George III was bankrupting England to fight an unjust war against fellow Englishmen. The messaging was simple, catchy, and deeply persuasive. It created anger among working-class Londoners who were suffering from rising taxes and food prices caused by trade blockades. When news of American battles reached England, these secret society writers exaggerated British losses and praised the bravery of colonial fighters. Protests began breaking out in British cities. Recruitment for the British Army dropped sharply across England because young men were being convinced that dying in American swamps was a fool's errand. By controlling the narrative on the streets of London, the secret society divided the British public, turned citizens against their own government's war policies, and made it politically dangerous for Parliament to escalate the conflict. By late 1775, British officials in Whitehall knew something was terribly wrong. Top-secret cabinet decisions were appearing in American newspapers just weeks after they were discussed in London. Supply ships were being intercepted with mathematical precision. Suspicion and paranoia tore through the highest levels of British government. Lord Sandwich, the head of the British Admiralty, and Crown intelligence officers realized they were chasing ghosts inside their own building. The British Secret Service launched a brutal counter-espionage campaign to hunt down the traitors inside the establishment. Postal inspectors began intercepting, unsealing, and reading thousands of private letters passing through London post offices. Crown spies infiltrated coffee houses, taverns, and printing shops, looking for anyone dropping hints of pro-American sympathies. Trusted clerks were suddenly removed from their posts, and security around military paperwork was tightened to extreme levels. Several low-level operatives and couriers were caught and thrown into dark cells. Suspected sympathizers were followed through the foggy streets of London by undercover agents. The pressure on Arthur Lee and his inner circle reached a boiling point. Yet, despite arrests and constant surveillance, the core secret society survived. The ring was so decentralized, using double-blind contacts and hidden safehouses, that Crown agents could never grab the entire thread. Every time British intelligence shut down one leak, two more opened up in a different department, keeping the Crown completely off balance. The Shadow War reached its most dangerous climax when the sabotage campaign spilled out of the offices and into Britain's critical military infrastructure. The Crown was about to realize that these conspirators were not just passing notes. They were ready to strike at the heart of the Royal Navy. In the winter of 1775 and into early 1776, a series of mysterious explosions and fires rocked key British naval installations, culminating in the infamous arson attempts targeting the royal dockyards at Portsmouth and Bristol. Portsmouth was the crown jewel of British naval power, the very place where warships were refitted and armed before sailing across the Atlantic to crush the rebellion. Late one night, a devastating fire erupted inside the Portsmouth ropewalk, destroying massive stockpiles of hemp, timber, and specialized naval stores meant for the fleet. Loss panicked British military planners. Without ropes and rigging, dozens of British warships were rendered completely immobile in port, delayed for months while repairs were dragged out. When Crown investigators discovered sophisticated incendiary devices hidden among the ashes, panic swept through the British cabinet in Whitehall. It was no accident. A sabotage operative, connected to pro-American networks, had bypassed armed guards and set fire to the heart of British naval power. King George III called emergency meetings. Guards were doubled at every dockyard across the country, and fear paralyzed the government. The British Empire realized that the war was no longer happening 3,000 miles away across the ocean. The front line was right here on English soil. Why was the most powerful empire on Earth completely unable to crush this secret network? The answer comes down to one massive flaw in British thinking: arrogance and an outdated view of intelligence. British military leaders were trained to fight traditional European wars. They understood line formations, heavy naval bombardments, and formal sieges. They expected their enemies to wear uniforms and stand on open battlefields. They simply could not comprehend that their own gentlemen, politicians, and clerks, men who spoke with perfect English accents and attended the same London clubs, were secretly working to bring down the Crown. Furthermore, the Shadow Network was designed like a modern cell structure. Operatives worked in tiny, isolated groups. A clerk leaking documents in Whitehall had no idea who the courier was carrying the note to the harbour. If one member was caught by Crown spies, they could only expose a single link, not the entire chain. George Washington and his agents in London understood something revolutionary. You do not need to defeat a superpower's army on the battlefield if you can paralyze its brain at home. By keeping the British government confused, paranoid, and divided, the secret society bought precious time for the Continental Army during its weakest, most vulnerable months in 1775. While British generals in London argued over leaked plans and delayed supply fleets, Washington was able to build, train, and equip the army that would eventually fight for American independence. When history books talk about the American Revolution, they focus on famous battles like Saratoga, Cowpens, and the final British surrender at Yorktown. We picture redcoats marching across open fields, cannon fire, and heroic bayonet charges. But those iconic victories on American soil were only possible because of the Shadow War that crippled Britain from the inside back in 1775. The secret society operating inside London delivered an invisible blow that altered the entire trajectory of the war. By leaking top-secret military intelligence, sabotaging vital supply chains, delaying troop deployments, and turning British public opinion against the Crown, these hidden conspirators bought the young American rebellion the one thing it needed most: time. Without those crucial delays in 1775, George Washington's starving, poorly equipped Continental Army likely would have been crushed before it ever had a chance to grow into a real fighting force. The British military possessed all the raw power necessary to win the war on paper. But power is completely useless if your orders are stolen, your ships are delayed, your supplies are ruined, and your plans are read by the enemy before your own generals even see them. Britain did not just lose North America on the battlefields of the New World. They lost their empire in the foggy streets, smoky taverns, and quiet offices of London, where a secret ring of insiders systematically dismantled the British war machine from the inside out. Today, the names of these London conspirators are mostly forgotten, hidden under centuries of dust and official secrecy. But their shadow war remains one of the most effective intelligence operations in history. They proved that a few dedicated insiders operating in silence can bring the world's greatest superpower to its knees. History is filled with battles won on the open field, but the war for American independence was quietly decided in the dark hallways of London back in 1775. If this deep dive into history's forgotten intelligence operations blew your mind, hit that like button and subscribe right now. We bring you the untold stories and real strategies behind history's biggest turning points every single week. Drop a comment below and tell us which hidden historical conspiracy we should uncover.